بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والصلاة والسلام على خير المرسلين وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. The plan was not for Jonathan to go first, but I just landed and just made it to the hall from the airport. So if in the middle of my talk I become foggy, just it will be for jet lag and nothing else for my talk. What I wanted to do is to put a few strands together relative to political engagement, civic engagement, and working in coalitions, not only in relations to Muslim issues. I have a problem with defining issues as Muslim issues and non-Muslim issues. For me, all issues that pertain to the human being is a Muslim issue. I just came back from 7 different conferences on Islamophobia in Europe. Conference in France, in Sweden, Norway, Spain, Netherlands, the UK. And the issues that are dealt with in Europe in terms of Islamophobia has similar to the issues we deal with in here in terms of the rising tide of the right wing that's monetizing anti-Muslim hate and Islamophobia into votes at the ballot box. Just like we here have in this country that people are riding the Islamophobia camel into the White House, using antagonism toward Muslims in order to gain political seats. This is the phenomena that we are seeing across Europe, and also we're seeing it in other parts of the world, including India, where an open season on Muslims with lynchings occurring almost on a daily basis. We have genocide in Myanmar, which seems that nobody actually pays attention to similar circumstances in the Central African Republic. So the broader issues that we need to deal with are issues that are transnational in nature. 65 million refugees and immigrants are in the move today, and the majority of those immigrant refugees are from Muslim majority countries. So just to put your sense that there's 65 million refugees and immigrants. The largest refugee population, again, are Syrians, Afghan, and Palestinians. Palestinians having been refugees from 48. Afghan have been refugees from 79. And the Syrians right now are refugees from at least the past 5 years. These 3 groups together constitute close to 20 million, give or take, in terms of population. You add to it Somalia and other countries, so the bulk of the populations that we're dealing with in relations to refugees/immigrants crisis having to do a lot with Muslims. And the subtext of this debate, when you deal with the debate of immigration and refugees, it has to do with a long history of racism. When we discuss racism and race issues, we tend to only think of it just in the most recent past. Let me remind you that the definition or the crafting of a race theory emerges during the post-1492, meaning the crafting of a European white identity was constructed around otherization of Muslims and Jews. So Europe had to expel the other, meaning from Spain, Muslims and Jews in terms of the Inquisition. And the Inquisition was not a single-day event like you have a parade downtown Chicago. The Inquisition was a 350-year period. So the Inquisition lasted 350-year period that completely transformed what we call the Spain-Portugal area and completely ethnically cleansed the Muslim and Jewish populations. So when we are thinking in relations to race issues and the crafting of racial theory, Europe defined itself as being white Christian, and the purity of race comes around from those who did not mix with Muslims and Jews. And then it gets to be transplanted into the New World and the concept of subhumanness, meaning the category of human and subhuman. And the subhuman is anything other than Europe is subhuman. So that crafts around 1492 and thereafter and continues to be at the foundation of what we think today in relations to Western society. And what this defines Western society, the notions about diversity, what it means to be diverse, because diversity is being shaped around us that to be diverse is basically you have to integrate into the majority. That's not diversity. That's basically actually forcing conformity to an already constructed dominant majority, and this dominant majority has a particular notions of what it is to be integrated. So in essence, when we think about working collectively and developing coalitions, what are the principles by which we enter into these discussions? And what do we bring to the table? Right? I know some Muslims are happy to be invited. I'm not a person that is happy to be invited. I don't want to be invited to a place that's my country. Right? So again, this notion that we are invited to a place because essentially we gave the other the right to define who belongs and who doesn't belong. And often Muslims are happy to be invited, even though I always say that they're invited and they're on the menu, but they don't realize these discussions about being on the menu. You have to actually not only be on the menu, but you have to actually shape the menu. You have to go shopping, you have to go to the market, you have to pick all of what the fruits, the vegetables that you need to cook. You need to plan the meal yourself, the 7-course or 9-course meal. You have to be engaged, you have to engage in the decoration. Don't be only happy to be invited, because again, this is the integration track or assimilation track that is invited to be at arrival being in there. So there has to be a discussion of what it is to be included and what it is to develop a coalition. So I've been working with a set of principles that we need to come to the table with. And these principles, I think there are overarching principles, if anything, to resort back to the Hilf al-Fudul as a foundation for us to engage in, Hilf al-Fudul as an aspect of our tradition from the Prophet ﷺ. He witnessed Hilf al-Fudul, and in Medina he said, I have attended or witnessed a gathering. If I was invited to during the Islamic period, I would have answered, or I would have answered this call, meaning that this would constitute for us a sunnah. If we are invited to a gathering that is based on a principle of justice and addressing the needs of the weak and rectifying the affairs of the society, we respond, not because of who the person is affected, but because it's our principle to actually rectify the affairs of the society and be those who are answering the call. So for me, the first principle is that we have to be centered on being a people of justice. All right, being a people of justice. One of the 99 names of Allah is Al-Adl, right, the all just. So all manifestation of justice in the world is but a reflection of the divine name. And when you're acting in and answering the call for justice, you have to also think that the answer or the outcome is not in your own hand. The outcome is with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Part of it is that we want to see the results immediately. And that's part of what you call the human covetousness, that we want to see the results. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is ordering us to be engaged in justice. We repeat it in every Friday prayer. إِنَّ اللَّهَ يَأْمُرُ بِالْعَدْلِ وَالْإِحْسَانِ وَإِيتَاءِ ذِي الْقُرْبَى وَيَنْهَى عَنِ الْفَحْشَاءِ وَالْمُنكَرِ وَالْبَغْيِ. This is something we repeat at the end of, in the beginning of the khutbah, sometimes at the end of the khutbah. So Allah is commanding to justice. In a similar way that Allah commands you to pray, is commanding you to justice. It's one of the commands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So if you have a choice between justice and injustice, you actually don't have a choice to be on the side of injustice. You have to be on the side of justice. And you have to be on the side of justice even against your own self, because it's easy to be for justice when it involves somebody else. Right? We're all rallying if it's like a distant place. That's also some of my students, when we talk about students, everybody wants to go someplace else to address justice, right? I want to go to Colombia and try to help the poor there. And downstairs, just down the street from where Berkeley is Oakland. We have homelessness. In Berkeley itself, we have homelessness. Right? But it's easy actually to go and externalize and go across as part of what you call the nonprofit industrial complex or a humanitarian industrial complex. Right? Part of it is you go and visit and you take pictures, you put the selfies, the Snapchat, and all of a sudden you think that you're actually transforming, but you're actually participating in the continuation of the structure. Right? So again, is to actually undertake acts of justice even against your own self, against your next of kin, those whom you possibly have benefit from. So it has to be an overarching principle that you actually address in relations to engagement. So if there is a coalition that is being asked, is the coalition founded upon a principle of justice? right? Or is it founded upon identity politics? Right? Because often we confuse identity politics in relations to or in difference to overarching principles of justice. Now, I'm very critical of Muslims that we rally out when it's us, just us, but we're absent when it is someone else. Like, for example, if you are not rallying for immigrant rights, which is a very critical Muslim issue, do you think that Trump and the neoconservatives and the alt-right and the Huntington thesis, do you think that they were worried about the Russian immigrants only? What was Huntington thesis about the clash of civilization? And how to keep America, or how to make America great again, and how to take our country back again. It is actually to try to maintain America as a white, Anglo-Saxon settler society. And how you do that, you keep the brown people out. I know that some Muslims want to be white, but let me tell you, the overwhelming majority of Muslims are from the southern hemisphere. We don't have melanin deficiency syndrome. And Huntington's thesis was directed at you specifically in relations to changing or crafting a different immigration policy. Stop the Islamization of Europe is also crafted around the same dynamic. So we get a mass rally for immigration and refugee rights, and Muslims say, well, it's not our issue. So what's your issue? Well, halal food. MashaAllah. Right? So we tend to actually craft it only around what we call identity issues rather than thinking of the overarching principle of justice. Which means also we need to critique Muslim countries on immigration and refugee issues. So you cannot actually go out in Europe, which I do, and I critique the French, I critique the British, the Dutch, on their immigration policy and refugee policy, but some of our own Muslim countries have a horrific immigration and refugee policies. And they have not admitted refugees, with the exception, again, with the three countries that have taken the burden of the refugee crisis the most recent past are Turkey, Lebanon, and Jordan. Three countries that have least ability in terms of resources aside from Turkey to take the burden. In Lebanon, almost 1/3 of the population now is refugees. Jordan have taken about 1 million refugees from Iraq war plus, and took another 1 million from Lebanon, from the Syrian conflict. While you get the French and the US are talking about you want to play foreign policy chess game, while the countries that have least resources are being impacted by it. So, principle of justice have to be something that you act upon, and you cannot divide it into only when it involves me. Because if you don't show up, right, and follow your talk with walking the talk, then people are just going to say you're a self-interested person, that you really are not looking in larger principles that affects everyone else. And similarly on other issues, environment, prison industrial complex. Like, how many of you in here are active in anything relative to the prisons? Oh, mashallah, alhamdulillah, we have one person in there, 2 people. And in this country, we have 2 million prisoners. It's a private enterprise, meaning people make actually investment. You could invest in the prison industrial complex. Now, mashallah, we're happy because African Americans tend to convert in the prison in large numbers. So, mashallah, we do takbir on that, but we don't do any work about all the people that have been railroaded through the illegal system. I don't call it legal system because people have been shafted. And you know, in Illinois, they had to suspend the death penalty because people have been shafted into the prison system to be on the death row. So, is prison industrial complex a Muslim issue? Or it's not? How do you define it? Now, I know some of us are active on trying to close and shut down Guantanamo Bay. We also have many of our brothers and sisters that have been railroaded in different type of entrapment, material support. So if you're not engaged in the prison industrial complex, then what type of justice that you actually are participating in relations to building coalitions with other people? So coalition has to be founded on a principle of justice, an overarching, but also you'd have to be engaged across the board in many issues and not to only divide it around only identity. Doesn't mean that you don't have your identity, have it, but there has to be an overarching principle. The second, and I don't want to go through all the principles that I highlight. Second is that you have to approach every human being with dignity. And this is again from Quranic narrative. وَلَقَدْ كَرَّمْنَا بَنِي آدَمَ. The dignity of the human being, even if the person is sinning, he still or she still have a dignity vested to them by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So in your action, condemn the sin, but not the sinner in the terms of the language. So you still continuously preserve the dignity of the human being. So how to make that actually applicable in how we deal in a very diverse society. Now just let me give you a picture. The United States, the Muslims are 1.2, maybe 1.5% of the population. And even among Muslims, we have all types of Muslims, from leaded to unleaded to premium plus, all types of shades. Again, in the Bay Area, I have almost every shade of Muslims in there, and also the persons like non-practicing Muslim, which is something that is increasingly frequent. And you go outside the Muslim community, you have almost every other spectrum. And again, I invite you to come and visit Berkeley. You have actually down on Telegraph Avenue, devil worshippers right there, right at Telegraph Avenue. So how to preserve the dignity of the human being confronted with this multiplicity? And how to delineate the particular action that you yourself find offensive from your vantage point, while maintaining the dignity of the human being that is doing something offensive, but you have to actually collectively work to maintain some level of coherence in civil society. It's a challenge. It's not something that is easy, but it's a challenging for us to undertake. All right? Again, preserving the dignity of the human being. Now, the third principle that I want to cover, and I know I have some time, is economic equity. And this is, I've been very critical of our lack of involvement in issues pertaining to economic equity in the society, not only in the Muslim society, but also globally. Oxfam this year have put a report, it says 8 individuals possess more wealth than 50% of the world population. 8 individuals. All right? Which means that 3 years ago, 2014, there were 82 individuals that have more wealth than 50% of the population. So literally in 3-year period, the amount of concentration of wealth that have occurred, that went from 82 individuals to 8 individuals, is an obscene development that everyone should be concerned about. Again, most of those who are at the lower rung of the economy are inhabiting the southern hemisphere. And what we want is for you to be conscious, because we're still living in a post-colonial world which is maintaining the colonial economies, it's just with a new name. And just to give an illustration of how the structure of the economy globally is still vested in the same dynamics, I ask the question, how many of you in here like chocolate? Just raise your hand, don't worry, Okay, what is the best chocolate that's in the market? German? Lindorf. Where is Lindorf from where? Switzerland. Okay, good. 1 minute. What else? Belgium. Now, do you know all the names of the countries? And I don't have much time. None of them have a single plant of cocoa. All the cocoa plants are in the southern hemisphere, in Africa and in the Caribbean and some in Latin America. And yet none of those countries, because of the structure of economy, are able to produce the chocolate, and some of them have never tasted the chocolate that you mentioned. They see the Swiss chocolate with maybe a woman model holding a chocolate, right, in magazine, but they never tasted the chocolate that you're speaking of. And that is, again, part of a structure of economy that is there. Now, for the Muslim world, again, we're oil-producing countries. For the most part, we produce oil, we buy weapons to kill each other, produce more oil, buy weapons to kill each other, produce more oil, buy weapons to kill each other. That's a colonial structure that is there, and we just recently sold about $410 billion of military equipment, which means pouring more fuel into an already devastating areas. That's why whenever somebody asks me for why Muslims are violent, I respond immediately, stop selling us weapons. Because 55% of the global arms trade of weapons is in the United States. We have 55% of the world market. The war is a business, and the business of war is more war. And unless we understand the economy that we are part of, then we're just actually tangentially thinking that, oh, we need to stop Muslims from being violent. If legally you give a gun to a person knowing that they're going to shoot someone else, then you are culpable in the crime that is being committed. So I'm telling the United States and Europe and the countries that sell weapons, stop selling weapons and being merchants of death and building an economy based on death. If you want to build peace, then stop military-industrial complex. That's how we actually begin to connect economic critique with an economy that is an economy that will build and promote life rather than being a death economy. So, assalamu alaikum.